Ford Pinto fuel tank case. In 1971, Ford Motor Company launched what they hoped would be their answer to the Japanese import invasion, the Ford Pinto. It was small, affordable, and stylish. But within a few years, the Pinto would become one of the most infamous examples of corporate negligence in American history. This is the story of the Ford Pinto fuel tank case, a cautionary tale about what happens when profit is prioritized over human life. On Chapter 1, The Rush to Market. Let's set the scene. It's the late 1960s, and American automakers are watching Japanese competitors like Toyota and Datsun dominate the small car market. Ford's president, Lee Iacocca, decided his company wouldn't sit idly by. In 1968, he pushed through an ambitious plan: create a subcompact car that was no more than 2,000 pounds, cost no more than $2,000, and, here's the kicker, be ready in just 25 months. To put that in perspective, the normal development cycle for a new car model was about 43 months. Ford was cutting that time almost in half. This aggressive timeline would prove to be a fatal mistake. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until engineers discovered a critical flaw in the fuel tank design. During crash testing, they found that the fuel tank, positioned behind the rear axle and in front of the rear bumper, had several serious problems. In rear-end collisions at speeds over 25 miles per hour, the tank would rupture every single time. Here's what Ford engineers discovered. When the Pinto was hit from behind at around 28 miles per hour or more, the rear end would crumple, driving the fuel tank forward into the differential housing, those sharp bolts and edges from the rear axle assembly. The tank would split open, the filler pipe would break loose, and gasoline would spill out. Add some sparks from the collision, and you had a recipe for disaster. For Chapter 2, The $11 Decision. Now here's where this story takes a dark turn. Ford engineers came up with several solutions. They could add a rubber bladder inside the fuel tank for $5 to $8 per car, install structural protection in the rear for $4.20 per vehicle, place a plastic baffle between the tank and the differential for just $2.35 per car. The most comprehensive fix would cost about $11 per vehicle. Ford had already developed and owned the patent on a much safer gas tank design. The technology existed, the solutions were affordable. So what did Ford do? They did a cost-benefit analysis. An internal report reveals Ford's reasoning. They calculated that fixing the problem would cost approximately $113 million. That's the $11 per car multiplied by all the Pintos they planned to produce, plus the production delays. On the other side of the ledger, they estimated that paying out injury claims, settlements for severe burns, and wrongful death lawsuits would cost about $49 million. They even assigned specific dollar values to human life: $200,000 per death, $67,000 per major burn injury, and $700 per vehicle for repair costs. The math was simple, and the decision was made. Don't fix the problem. It was cheaper to let people die and pay the settlements. One Ford engineer later testified, "Did anyone go to Mr. Iacocca and tell him the gas tank was unsafe? Hell no. That person would have been fired." Safety wasn't a popular subject around Ford in those days. With Lee, it was taboo. Iacocca himself was famous for saying, "Safety doesn't sell." Chapter 3, The Human Cost. The Pinto went into production in September 1970. Over the next several years, rear-end collisions began claiming lives. The exact death toll is disputed. Ford claimed 23 deaths, while critics and Mother Jones magazine put the number between 500 and 900 burn deaths. According to sworn testimony from Ford engineers, 95% of those fatalities would have survived if Ford had simply relocated the fuel tank. Let me tell you about one case that changed everything. Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company. On May 28, 1972, Lily Gray was driving her 1972 Ford Pinto on a California freeway with 13-year-old Richard Grimshaw as her passenger. The car stalled in the center lane. A vehicle traveling at approximately 50 miles per hour struck them from behind. impacting at an estimated 30 to 50 miles per hour. The Pinto's fuel tank ruptured and the car burst into flames. Lily Gray died on impact. Richard Grimshaw suffered severe burns over his body, injuries that would require him to endure over 50 surgeries and cause him pain for the rest of his life. When the case went to trial in 1978, the jury was shown Ford's internal documents, including those cost-benefit analyses. They were outraged. The jury awarded $125 million in punitive damages and over $3.5 million in compensatory damages. It was the largest personal injury award in U.S. history at that time. The judge later reduced the punitive damages to $3.5 million, but the message was clear. Corporations that knowingly put profits over human lives would pay a price. So Chapter 4, The Fallout. The Grimshaw case, combined with a damning 1977 Mother Jones investigation titled Pinto Madness, created a media firestorm. The Center for Auto Safety had been petitioning the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration since 1974, but it wasn't until this public outcry that action was taken. In June 1978, just days before the NHTSA was set to issue a formal recall order, Ford agreed to a voluntary recall of 1.5 million Ford Pintos and 30,000 Mercury Bobcats, the largest automotive recall in history at that time. The recall added exactly the kinds of protections engineers had recommended years earlier: a polyethylene shield, a lengthened filler tube, and improved seals. But here's the tragedy. Between June 9, 1978, when the recall was announced, and September 15, 1978, when parts became available at dealerships, 6 more people died in Pinto fires, and the legal battles weren't over. In August 1978, 3 young women died when their Pinto was rear-ended in Elkhart, Indiana. In an unprecedented move, a grand jury indicted Ford Motor Company on 3 counts of reckless homicide. This was the first time in American history that a corporation faced criminal charges in a product liability case. In March 1980, Ford was found not guilty. Their lawyers successfully argued that the crash occurred at higher speeds than alleged, and therefore wasn't caused by the fuel tank defect, but the damage to Ford's reputation was permanent. Chapter 5. Lessons and Legacy. So what did we learn from the Ford Pinto case? And more importantly, has anything changed? First, the legal landscape shifted dramatically. The Pinto case helped establish that punitive damages serve a crucial purpose. They create incentives for corporations to make responsible decisions. Without the threat of massive penalties, the cold calculus of cost-benefit analysis might always favor the cheaper option, even if it costs lives. Second, automotive safety standards were revolutionized. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 301 was significantly strengthened. Before 1976, there were no requirements for rear-impact fuel system integrity. Today, vehicles must meet rigorous crash standards for front, rear, and side impacts. Third, the case became a cornerstone of business ethics education. Every MBA program in America teaches the Pinto case as an example of what not to do. It's a stark reminder that short-term profit optimization can lead to long-term catastrophe. Now, it's worth noting that later analysis has provided some context. Some scholars have pointed out that the Pinto's death rate per vehicle sold wasn't dramatically different from other subcompacts of that era. The entire industry had safety problems, and the famous cost-benefit memo that was portrayed as cold-hearted Ford internal calculation was actually prepared for NHTSA investigations and used industry-wide standards. But here's what remains undeniable. Ford knew about the problem, had affordable solutions, and chose not to implement them. They crash-tested the Pinto more than 40 times, and the fuel tank ruptured in every test at speeds over 25 miles per hour. They had the data, they had the fixes, and they had the opportunity to do the right thing. Today, Ford builds some of the safest vehicles on the road. The company learned a painful, expensive lesson about the true cost of cutting corners on safety. The Pinto case fundamentally changed how automotive companies approach product development and risk management. But the broader lesson extends beyond just the auto industry. The Pinto case asks us to consider, what is a human life worth? Can we really reduce safety to a spreadsheet? And when corporations make decisions that affect public safety, who should hold them accountable? These questions remain relevant today as we grapple with safety issues in everything from ride-sharing apps to social media platforms to artificial intelligence. The Ford Pinto reminds us that behind every cost-benefit analysis, there are real people, people like Lily Gray and Richard Grimshaw, whose lives can never be reduced to a dollar figure. The case stands as a permanent warning. When companies prioritize profit over people, the cost, both human and financial, is always higher than they calculated. Lee Iacocca once said, "Safety doesn't sell." The Ford Pinto proved him wrong. What really doesn't sell is a reputation for valuing human life at $200,000 per person. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What modern products or industries do you think need better safety regulations? Let's keep this conversation going. See you in the next video.